Dennis Marr. I'm the retreaded president of the League of Women Voters, and welcome to the beginning of our program. In October, we're going to do pros and cons for the state propositions, and November, we're going to be talking about taxes. We're going to bring up Janet Brennan, who will be conducting the panel.
So we have a panel of 4 speakers, each with a different perspective on the issue of short-term rentals. And our first speaker is Luke Coletti. He is a senior research technician at Monterey Bay Aquarium. The speaker following him is Hank Armstrong. He's a former vice president of communications at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, where he worked for 33 years. Our next speaker will be Priscilla Walton, who is president of the Carmel Valley Association and a retired UC professor of education. And our last speaker is Jan Leasure, managing broker of Monterey Bay Vacation Rentals. So each has a different perspective on whether or not we should regulate short-term rentals, and if so, how? If not, why not? So, Luke.
Well, while the projector warms up, just one slight correction. I actually work at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, MBARI, up in Moss Landing. I've been there since 1989, and I do chemical sensor development in Ken Johnson's Chem Sensor Lab. So I'm going to be presenting about Pacific Grove's Measure M. It's a ballot initiative to preserve and protect Pacific Grove's residential character. So what is a short-term vacation rental, or an STR? You can often see it abbreviated that way. Typically, it refers to transient use or lodging of a residence in residentially zoned districts. It can be hosted. This is often called home sharing or home stays, or non-hosted, and that's usually called just a short-term rental. Short-term rentals on the Monterey Peninsula were prohibited early on. Carmel did it in 1989, Monterey in 1991. And Pacific Grove reaffirmed their long-standing prohibition in 1993. They had actually never allowed it previously. There might be some confusion on that. Pacific Grove began allowing short-term rentals in 2010 as an experiment. It was meant to go find out whether they could do it and how much money they could raise from it, essentially. Monterey and Carmel continue to prohibit them. Carmel allows them in commercial zones, and Pacific Grove residents will now be able to vote on limited prohibition at the November 2018 election as Measure M. So these are some impacts from short-term vacation rentals: noises, parties, trash. We've seen it all in letters to the editor, etc. Parking, traffic, and loss of residential character is a big one as well. And Carmel actually took that on, and I'm going to explain a little bit about that later. There's also a loss of housing stock, and STRs drive up the cost, the baseline cost of housing, and cannibalize the hotel industry. Benefits from STRs, a nice big money tree. They provide supplemental income to operators. I do point out, however, that unfortunately this does attract outside investors who exploit the opportunity. It's possible for the city to generate some TOT, transient occupancy tax, and it facilitates tourism. How to balance the benefits and impacts. This has kind of been the ongoing question in Pacific Grove for the last 5 years, and didn't make a lot of headway. The benefits and impacts vary from community to community. An essential part of figuring this out is how to solicit as much input as possible from the entire community. And this is kind of where we are, at least in my opinion, within Pacific Grove. The ballot initiative becomes necessary when elected officials ignore the community values and the quality of life of residents. There hasn't been a ballot initiative. Can everyone's hearing me okay, by the way? Okay. There hasn't been a ballot initiative in Pacific Grove since, the 80s. 1986 was the last big one, and that was a zoning issue as well. Now, if we go back here, one of the solicit input from the community, this kind of addresses this. The city conducted a survey. They're putting a TOT increase, a tax measure, on the ballot in November as well. And prior to putting that on the ballot, they wanted to conduct a survey to see how likely it was that residents would support it. Came back overwhelmingly that they would support it, 72%. And some of the questions that they put into the survey as well, they slipped in a question about how the city is managing short-term rental properties. And you can see here 63% provided a negative response, saying that the residents feel that STRs are not being well managed by the city. And that's a survey that the city did, and kind of for TOT, but kind of snuck in a question about short-term rentals to see how they were doing. The city also had an open-ended question, essentially, tell us what you think the biggest problem in town is. And it came back, the two biggest problems from the residents that took the survey, lack of affordable housing and short-term rentals. So here we are now. We've got a ballot measure, and this is kind of the context of it and what it'll be doing. It's going to prohibit all short-term rentals in all residential zoning districts outside of the coastal zone. And this is the green parcels. Color's kind of turning up a little funny on this, but essentially all the green parcels are outside of the coastal zone, and these are all residential properties. As you can see, Pacific Grove truly is a city of homes. This is all residentially zoned districts. The Measure M does allow, however, STRs in commercial districts and within the coastal zone. Coastal zone in Pacific Grove is kind of this irregularly shaped boundary, but the blue parcels are residential parcels within the coastal zone. STRs will be allowed to continue with Measure M. They'll also be allowed to continue in commercial districts, and that's this yellow, although it's kind of turning out, I don't know what that is actually. It's kind of a disgusting color. It also allows home sharing to continue throughout the entire city. And home sharing, again, is room rentals while the owner resident is present. We completely support that. We think that's truly the sharing economy model, and that STRs have actually taken the sharing economy model and kind of, gotten off the track. This is what Measure M will do before and after. So again, Measure M regulates STRs in residential areas outside the coastal zone. These are all actual STRs. This is a map of location of current STRs in town. The green one, again, are the ones that will be regulated. The blue ones will be allowed to continue in the coastal zone, and these are commercial. And this is what the map of allowed residential use would be for STRs in Pacific Grove after Measure M. Currently, there are 256 STRs, 171 of them are outside the coastal zone, 72 are in the coastal zone, and 13 are in commercial districts. And again, the commercial districts are the gray houses. And again, home sharing is not affected. So once you get Measure M adopted, a lot of people thinking, well, this is something new. We're doing something new in Pacific Grove. It's never been done, or it's concerning because it's never been done. But it's actually been done before in Carmel. And Carmel, again, they banned short-term rentals in 1989 in the residential districts. And they were sued, and it went all the way up to the appellate level. They were sued by a Mr. Ewing, a property owner in Carmel. And Ewing, the facts were the owner had a single-family home in a residentially zoned area. He challenged the city's ordinance to prohibit transient use. And again, transient use is less than 30 days. That's also how Pacific Grove defines it. And what the court held, the Ewing court held at the appellate level, was that preservation of residential character of a neighborhood is sufficient reason to prohibit short-term vacation rentals in that neighborhood. And Ewing has been cited. If you look up Ewing v. Carmel on Google Scholar, it's just been cited dozens and dozens and dozens of times. Here are some of the findings within the ruling. A zoning ordinance does not constitute a taking simply because it narrows a property owner's options. In fact, many zoning ordinances place limits on the property owner's right to make profitable use of some segments of their property. Sometimes people will say, well, hey, I've got a property right. Well, you know, property rights are important. I certainly believe that, but so are zoning codes, so that the community actually benefits as a whole as well. This is another important finding within Ewing. Whether or not transient rentals have other unmitigatable adverse impacts cited by the council, such rentals undoubtedly affect the character of a neighborhood and the stability of a community. Short-term tenants have little interest in public agencies or in the welfare of citizenry. And I invite you to look up Ewing and read it. It's actually it's a beautifully written case. So then some will often talk about enforcement. Okay, fine, you pass Measure M, what are you going to do about enforcement? Well, the internet is what created this problem, and the internet is what can be used to solve it. Monterey has adopted an ordinance that prohibits advertising of STRs in the city's residential zones. The city is contracted with the host compliance. They basically are going after the people who are advertising them, and Monterey's been very effective. I've spoken with their city manager. They've been very effective in actually managing STRs. Carmel is actually really going after them. As of January, they shut down 139 in their residential districts. But even kind of more importantly, they found STRs in their commercial districts that were operating without a license. They signed them up, got them licensed, and now they're generating revenue for the city where they weren't before. And again, Carmel allows them in the commercial areas. This is kind of a rhetorical question. You know, what kind of responsibility do these online platforms like Airbnb have to the community other than just getting some money out of it? So here are some of the fiscal impacts. This is just why we can extract hotel tax from the community. MPG STRs generate over $1 million. However, sales tax revenue has remained remarkably flat while the number of STRs has mushroomed. STRs don't appear to help our local business community, at least not in the way some people are defining it. Measure M would reduce residential TOT revenue by approximately 2/3. However, again, there's a TOT measure on the ballot, Measure U. This would increase TOT from 10% to 12%, would substantially offset the loss caused by Measure M in limiting STRs. Reduced competition from STRs will also likely increase hotel occupancy and further help offset potential financial loss. Yeah, 2 more slides and I'll be out. It's a weighty subject. So here's the actual number of STRs in Pacific Grove since they were allowed in 2010. You can see here, pretty steep trend here, pretty steep trend here, but then it kind of went nuts here in 2014, 2015, leveled off, and now we're here at this 256 where we're at currently. And these are number of active licenses. The city's actually issued more than 400 licenses total, but the number of active licenses at any one time is reflected in this chart. So I talked about TOT and sales tax. This graph here, this line here shows sales tax in the city of Pacific Grove for fiscal years 2015, 16, 17, 18. It's remarkably flat, even though we've had this influx of STRs into the community. And this is a TOT collection from commercial, our hotels and inns. Had a bit of an increase and then a little bit of drop off. In fact, it kind of matches this inflection point of the TOT collection from STRs. But TOT from commercial is slightly down, while TOT from residential has gone up a lot. A lot of people say, well, you know, we're making $2 million a year. It should be pointed out that Pacific Grove has only collected more than $1 million a year from TOT from STRs in the last 2 years. Here's hotel occupancy, Monterey versus Pacific Grove. Pacific Grove is pretty flat. Monterey has seen some increase and then leveled off. But there is this capacity offset between occupancy in Pacific Grove and occupancy in Monterey. I just threw this in there. I don't know. And here's Gary Larson's reason why we have zoning. You've got the Institute for a Study of Migraine Headaches next to Floyd's School of Marching Bands, and the dam bursts, and these are all the people with yes on M signs. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Hank Armstrong.
I have PowerPoint envy, Luke. I'm sorry, you're just going to have to listen to my voice. And I do agree with the last two slides. And I really thank the League for letting me representing We Love PG, which is actually a group of people who are opposing Measure M. And that's going to be the message I'm going to touch on just now. Whether or not you like short-term rentals, you may love them, you may hate them, probably most people are in between. I'm going to make the case in the next few minutes that Measure M is not a good answer and you should vote no. The reason in a nutshell is one, it probably won't do what it intends to do. It makes some promises it can't keep, and more importantly to us, which our formal name is the Committee for Financially Sound Pacific Grove, it's going to create a significant financial problem for the city. So the way I look at it, and I think we look at it, is Measure M. There's a lot of questions around Measure M. And I'm going to phrase those as questions and run down them. The first, and probably the largest, is how can M be good for our city of Pacific Grove when it cuts $1.5 million estimated from the city budget? And it does it with no suggestion of alternative revenue at a time where our pension obligations will be rising over the next several years to as much as $4 million. So in essence, it's a looming financial crisis that we face in the city, and Measure M is, to put it kindly, not a help. It's a de facto budget cut of 6 to 7%, direct threat to the city finances, which of course includes the services that we as residents all receive, everything from having the police there when you want them, to having the library open when it's reasonable to go, to having the streets repaved. We don't want to go back to those days where the museum was about to close and the library was essentially not open in normal hours. So that's one key issue. And I think that's one of the reasons that last night at the candidates forum, 5 of the 7 candidates came out and opposed Measure M for exactly that reason. Bottom line is we need both Measure M to be defeated, and we need Measure U, the TOT, increase to achieve a financially stable city over the next 5 years. I know a lot of these numbers Luke and I are going to disagree with. I'll disagree with this chart, so I don't want to get into that. Next question I had in my mind was, will rezoning the city via single issue ballot initiative work well? Well, in history is any indication, it doesn't generally. Some people view initiatives like this as an end run around the city mechanisms put in place to do thoughtful planning. This is basically rezoning by initiative, and the unintended consequences are often bad. So our ex-mayor, Jeannie Byrne, has opposed Measure M. She's no fan of STRs, but she's also no fan of rezoning by initiative. Another question is, how can STRs be overrunning Pacific Grove when there's a maximum of 3% in the city? We have over 8,000 residences, roughly 250 are licensed, so that amounts to 3 out of 100. Luke put up the map, and this is one of those petty political arguments that we get into, but I also put the map we created up front, because the map that Luke showed you of where the short-term rentals are generally covers about 5 properties for every dot that's on it. So it does create a sense of urgency that may not be totally fair. So we've tried to depict it a little more fairly. As far as overrunning the city, we just don't think that's the case. We think that there's a limited number of STRs in the city. The program is fairly effective, and it can continue and isn't having a significant increase on most impact on most people in Pacific Grove. Another question: will limiting short-term rentals provide more and more affordable housing? I think that's more magical thinking than reality. We all know we need more housing, and we all want more affordable housing. Measure M will not produce either of those, in our opinion. You've got a maximum of, say, 170 short-term rentals that are going to be eliminated. If that's the case, those owners will have a number of options, which will include trying to work underground, which is not all that hard to do, unfortunately. Include sale of the property, including renting, long-term rentals, but those will be at market rates, not necessarily affordable rates. There's just a lot more and bigger forces going on in the cost of housing than short-term rentals. Another question I had is, if M is meant to help neighborhoods from sort of protect them from short-term rentals, how does that affect the coastal neighborhoods, the ones where all the short-term rentals will be concentrated? I'm not sure it's fair to them if you feel short-term rentals are a bad thing to put them all in those neighborhoods. I'm still not clear on the loophole either in the initiative that allows that, but I'm sure Luke can explain it further. The question of are outside investors buying up properties and making profits in Pacific Grove? I think I think the answer again is no. The reason I say that is because we had one realtor recently who got so frustrated with that claim, she went back and researched all the addresses for short-term rentals. Of those 250 plus, 10 have been sold in the last 10 years prior to the short term. So put another way, 97% of people who have those licenses have owned those homes since before the program came into place. The last question I had in my mind, actually second to the last, is will M bring back our sense of neighborhood and community as it intends to do? And personally, I don't think so. And the reason I say that, I'm going to give you my own experience. I've lived on Jewel Avenue in Pacific Grove for 33 years. I have 8 houses that are basically contiguous to me. Of those, 4 are long-term rentals that turn over probably roughly every year or a bit longer. 2 are homes owned by vacant, or that are vacant most of the time because they're owned by out-of-town owners and they only visit them occasionally. And 2 are primary owners who live in their residences. I have to say I don't honestly have a big sense of neighborhood anymore either, but those short-term rentals I don't think are the reason. It's a much bigger and more complex problem. The last question is, why vote for an initiative that, quote, limits short-term rentals when those short-term rentals are limited already by a city program that has responded to issues? I know Luke will disagree, but we feel the city's responded and will continue to tweak the program so the negatives that are there can be dealt with. Basically, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's keep the program and let's improve it and not terminate it. So thank you very much. That's all I had to say.
Thank you, Hank. Our next speaker is Pris Walton.
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank you for inviting me to come speak to you today about short-term rentals. And I have to admit that, as I started looking into the issue, I was sort of focused locally, but as I began trying to scour across the country and communities in California as well as cities in other states and even internationally, the issue of short-term rentals isn't parochial, and it's a major issue that cities and small towns are facing internationally as well as locally. From protesters lining up in the Piazza San Marco in Venice wanting to get rid of short-term rentals, to small towns like Bishop in California, basically prohibiting them to only monitored home. Oh, I'm too close, sorry. Okay, can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. In Bishop, where they have a fairly limited supply of single-family homes, so they've prohibited them within the city of Bishop and limited them to very highly regulated homestays. And it's got me to thinking about sort of the larger issues it presents us with, some of which are, major policy issues. And when we think about it in terms of, my town, your town, and don't look at the bigger picture, I think we miss a lot. Like for Monterey County alone, at least if you take the numbers from host compliance, there are about 4,000 additional rooms for visitors. And when you look at that and you ask yourself the question, these additional rooms, how much water are they using? What is the impact on the local traffic? And what is it costing residents, particularly those that have to end up moving out and commuting? And what is it doing to things like the environmental conditions, the infrastructure, the greenhouse gases? And, short-term rentals operate to a certain extent in an unregulated context, at least in the unincorporated area of Monterey County. And, if you want to build a hotel, you have to go through an arduous process to be able to get those rooms, where by contrast with short-term rentals, there's absolutely no process. And the majority of them are illegal. In the Carmel Valley, there are 187 of them, and out of those, 80% are single-family homes. And the county overall, when we've asked them, how many permits have you given for these, they have 20 registered, 20 short-term rentals. So one of the problems that the unincorporated area has is that they've never enforced the current ordinance, and in fact, I think they exacerbated the problem when in 2016 they announced that they didn't have the resources, the funding to monitor them, and so therefore they weren't going to do anything. And what that's created in places like the Carmel Valley is essentially a free-for-all, the Wild West, because people do know that the county is not doing anything. And the county operates on a complaint system. The complaint system and the issues of which you complain and those that get addressed are ranked, and things like complaints about short-term rentals are way down on the totem pole. So enforcement is a major issue. So it's one of the things as we were looking at it, how do you come up with something reasonable that doesn't, unjustly infringe upon the rights of homeowners who may want to do homestays, and, how do you work out a plan that doesn't destroy local communities? And so the ordinance we currently have actually allows people to rent up to 12 times a year. They could rent out every month if they want to. They couldn't rent out to 4 people, one every week or one every night, but you're already permitted. And many people use that, during car week, during events and so forth. So there's already something that exists that can be used that way. And so, again, the issue of regulation is almost non-existent in enforcing that particular ordinance. And the tack that we at the CVA and the coalition of people that we're working with in the Highlands and Del Monte, we said, okay, we think there's some issues about short-term rentals. Which ones should we, support and which ones not? And we think that you have to look at the capacity of your area and, what's there. In the Carmel Valley, we have 2 zones that have assigned numbers of what they call visitor serving units. And in effect, a room or the rooms in a house constitute a hotel room. They're actually having the same function, but they require none of the regulations that a hotel has. So there are other issues that arise with that. And so we came up with, with a position that we felt the most legitimate were the homestays with an owner who was in there and taking responsibility for the behavior of the tenants and also following all the licensing requirements. Where CVA felt we did not want to go was when we looked at the 187, this is only advertised, on a few of the platforms. There are many others, and there are also other people that by word of mouth now have dropped off platforms. So I think even the numbers that are listed aren't accurate. We would accept an equivalent number of visitor serving units if they converted them into short-term rentals. So we weren't dealing with the addition of more hotel rooms and more short-term rentals. Okay, now that's sort of a little bit of the Carmel Valley, and I have some copies of what we presented at the Planning Commission, if details of the outlines of what we would put in an ordinance. But I think that the big thing that struck me as I've been going through the literature is the problems that are generated by short-term rentals. Number one, illegality. Across the country and in most areas, there are high numbers, 80% and above of homes that are rented out illegally or even homestays. And in city after city, they continue to operate illegally, even after there were ordinances. And I want to just point to that because it highlights the issue of enforcement. And I don't think enough attention has been really focused on how you're going to enforce all of these ordinances. But even we do have evidence, and our 2 previous speakers talked about Carmel and Monterey, where when they have enforced, it has reduced and brought under control a lot of these illegal operations. The second major issue that is really, I think, important and not spoken enough about, and that is the whole issue of zoning and what acceptance of short-term rentals as we talk about them implies for us in terms of our zoning laws. In effect, you are de facto doing away with residential zoning, and you're commercializing residential zones. And that really needs to be looked at seriously as a policy question. And I don't often hear it discussed, although most recently in cities around the country, Miami, Boston, Los Angeles, West Hollywood, and the numerous small cities like Santa Barbara and Bishop, and most recently Palmdale, have now outright prohibited short-term rentals in residential zones 1 and 2. So that's a trend that is occurring. Affordability of housing has been touched upon, and again, most of the studies I've looked at New York, LA, Miami, New Orleans, Barcelona, Paris, Boston, all of them show increases in rent. And the studies have shown that between 9 and 35% of the 1,000 per month average increase in rents in Monterey is due to Airbnb rentals. And in many cases, people who used to be able to afford to live here have been squeezed out permanently. The other striking piece of research I ran across, which really concerned me, and it was also referred to here, is the whole notion of short-term investors. And the vast majority of STRs are owned by investment companies buying rental homes and planning to get basically long-term rentals out of the market and bringing them in for short-term rentals. Vacation home rentals have grown by 50% in the last 3 years, according to Bloomingdale and other resources. But this is the thing that I found most interesting. On Wall Street in the Wolf Report, different holding companies, okay, like Amherst Holding operates 20,000 rental homes and is raising $1 billion to buy more. Cerebras operates 11,000 rentals with planning to increase to 40,000. Front Yard, Pretium, Tricon, and others are purchasing more than 40,000. And Airbnb, just Airbnb, remember there are other platforms, is a $30 billion industry. It's the largest hotel industry in the world. So according to the Wolf Report, it says that these investment firms are paying prices at the peak of the market and amid ceaseless complaints that there isn't enough inventory of homes for sale for folks who actually want to live in the homes they buy. And these are just the biggest players. There's thousands of smaller players, and all but a few mom and pop investors pay cash and then fund the purchase with leverage at the institutional level. So, you know, this is turning into a Wall Street operation form of investment, and I think that's really important. Short-term rentals for us locally also impact our water supply, and if you start looking at the numbers and you look at the potential growth of the area and what we want to do to increase our water supply, then short-term rentals are going to eat up a considerable amount of that. Employment issues. Employers talk about having trouble recruiting people because they cannot afford to live in the area, and it adds sometimes an hour or more to commute to work here, and that has implications on the environment, on traffic, and a whole host of other reasons, things we need to focus on. Oh, okay. All right, so other areas are septic wastewater, increase in wildfires, and stability of neighborhoods. And so I want to leave you with a quote. It's from the mayor of Miami. He says, "We are seeing commercialized predatory companies trying to commercialize residential communities in ways that are damaging to our citizens and our residents and quality of life. It is people taking properties, buying them, and turning them essentially into businesses, and to put as many people as they can to extract as much income as they can in the middle of neighborhoods that are not zoned for those activities." Thank you.
Well, the last word before you get a chance to ask questions is from Jan Leasure.
Thanks so much. How's that distance from the mic, okay? Perfect. So when there's a demand for a product or service, a supplier, legal or illegal, will appear. We only have to look at marijuana for a clear example of that. The traveling public has gotten accustomed to having a vacation rental home as an accommodation option. And we've tried offering that option in Monterey County by legalizing and taxing STRs, and we've tried banning them. And the problem is that we haven't gotten very good at either option. Because this subject is so emotionally charged, it's extremely difficult for the parties to come to the table with logic and without emotion. Emotion causes people to jump to conclusions without empirical data. For example, it's common to think that short-term rentals do contribute to the affordable housing problem in Monterey County. The city of Pacific Grove surveyed its short-term rental owners to ask them what they would do with their homes if they could not rent them for less than 30 days. Nearly 100% of them said that they would either keep them for their own family's use or that they would rent them occasionally for 30 days at a time, which needs no license and generates no TOT. Only a few said that they would even consider turning their homes into long-term rentals. This was tested in 1993 when Pacific Grove reaffirmed its ban of rentals less than 30 days. I probably managed half of the short-term rentals in Pacific Grove at that time, and when that ban was adopted, only one of those properties became a long-term rental. So I think that's a good example of what these owners want to do with their houses. These are not investors. These are people who plan to come here and live here someday, and many of them have already. And they do want to use their homes. They want to become parts of the community, and they are not going to turn them into long-term rentals. I think that eliminating short-term rentals will open up more long-term housing is unfortunately wishful thinking. As you have heard, emotions surrounding this subject have also caused some to jump on the zoning bandwagon and point out that single-family residential neighborhoods are for single-family use. Yet most of the county's bed and breakfast inns and many hotels and motels are in or adjacent to residential areas. To reconcile the zoning conflict created by this apparent contradiction, some jurisdictions have created special zoning districts for these uses. The City of Monterey's creation of hotel and motel zones that are essentially circles that were drawn around existing establishments in the 1980s are an example of that. But the use preceded the zoning. The zoning did not precede the use. In addition, in all communities in Monterey County, the number of home-based businesses being run from single-family homes far surpasses the number of short-term rentals. Some communities in Monterey County and Measure M have agreed that owner-occupants should be allowed to short-term rent rooms in their homes to create an income stream. But that leads us back to the zoning question. If residents of single-family neighborhoods are allowed to rent rooms in their homes, either long-term or short-term, does that violate zoning laws by making those homes multifamily? I don't know. I think when the question of zoning is raised in reference to STRs, we have to be really careful not to fly the zoning flag without looking at zoning from the 10,000-foot level to see how it applies to various situations. Zoning is a situation that's changing rapidly, and because of the need for housing and the increased ability to work from home, the zoning lines that separate living space from workspace are really getting very blurry. Then there's the question of regulation. The primary complaints about short-term rentals over the years have been noise, parking, and trash. And I would never say that short-term rentals are without their problems. There are occasional issues, just as there are occasional issues with long-term tenants and with owner-occupants. However, the number of problems is small. During the first year that the City of Pacific Grove kept those statistics, there were 21 complaints during the rental of over 90,000 rented nights. I estimate that I've rented probably 250,000 nights in the last 35 years, and I can count on my fingers the times that there have been issues. Obviously, the goal would be no complaints, but that's unrealistic. Just as it is unrealistic to think that we would never have a long-term neighbor who plays his music too loudly or leaves his trash can on the street after the pickup. When we compare the small number of complaints with the financial benefits to our county, there's more than enough money generated to resolve the few problems that occasionally occur. So logistically, how do we do that? Most jurisdictions around the country where STRs have been licensed require each rental to have a local contact person who is available 24/7 to resolve problems. This is a really good start. The contact persons take their assignments very seriously, and they respond quickly to resolve any issues that come up, taking most of that burden off the jurisdiction. Some other solutions that have not been implemented locally but could be include the following. Noise Aware, which is a device that looks like a smoke detector, but it's a decibel meter that sends a text message to the local contact when the noise level at a property gets too high. On-property pickup for trash. Property owners could be required to subscribe to a trash service that will pick up the trash from where it's stored on the property and return the cans to that spot, so that the cans are never on the street. Property managers locally currently use this strategy for managed STRs. And with regard to parking, STRs are actually a solution to traffic and parking. Since most STRs are empty 30 to 50% of the time, and there are no cars there at all, the occupants of most STRs use fewer cars than permanent residents. For example, a party of 4 typically arrives in 1 car to an STR. A family of 4 who occupies a property long-term typically has 2 or more cars at the property. But to help even further, STR owners could be required to make all garages and all carports available for parking, and to park cars only off the street at the STR. STR owners and property managers could be required to attend a workshop on how to run an STR successfully and with as little impact on the neighborhood as possible. This solution has been implemented in Las Vegas with tremendous success. I mentioned earlier that STRs do not supplant affordable housing, but to be very sure that one does not slip through the cracks, part of the licensing process could be a requirement for a rental market analysis of the property by a local long-term property manager. If the market rent does fall into the category of what the jurisdiction defines as affordable, an STR license could be denied on that basis. My experience with STRs has taught me that visitors to Monterey County who want to rent a vacation rental where STRs are banned usually opt for one of 2 strategies. They find someone who will rent to them underground. Thus, they pay no transient occupancy tax to the jurisdiction, or they select a similar location where they can legally rent a home. For example, my customers who are told that we cannot provide them with the type of accommodation they want frequently choose Santa Cruz or Cambria, so their dollars never reach Monterey County. Some argue that vacation rental guests who are faced with a ban on their choice accommodation will simply go to a hotel, but most won't. First, it's not their preferred accommodation type. Second, it's more expensive to rent an equal number of hotel rooms as compared to a house. And finally, the hotels in Monterey County are full during the same time that vacation rentals are busy. So it'll be challenging for vacation renters to find hotel rooms at the time they want to come. STR guests who have been asked the direct question of whether they will visit Monterey County if they cannot rent a home have made it clear that they will go elsewhere. Embracing and regulating an activity that has become part of the travel landscape is a much more logical solution than bans, such as those in Monterey and Carmel by the Sea, or regulations that are a ban in disguise, such as the Monterey County Draft Ordinance. It costs money to enforce a ban, or even a partial one. And even in these healthy economic times, we observe that the jurisdictions of Monterey County don't have enough money to fund the programs and improvements to which they have obligated themselves. So it seems foolish to turn our backs on an activity that brings so much financial benefit to the residents of our county. One independent study found that STRs brought $131 million of residential income to the county. That's enough of an impact that we shouldn't simply ignore this income source. I understand the desire to live in a neighborhood where everybody knows their neighbors on a first-name basis and they wave to each other as they come and go to work every day. But that way of life is going away, regardless of what we do about STRs. Let's face it, there are few employment opportunities in Monterey County that afford today's home buyers of Monterey County homes, especially those along the coast where STRs tend to be located. And those buyers are from out of the area. So whether we allow STRs or not, the homes around us are still going to sit empty a large part of the time. They're not going to house full-time residents. And those vacant houses encourage crime in our neighborhoods. At least with STR guests and housekeepers coming and going, potential burglars see the lights on frequently. I started by saying that this is an emotional issue. And after all these years, I'm pretty pragmatic about it. But I still do get great joy from sharing this most beautiful part of the world with others who are not as fortunate as we are to live and work here. Thank you.
Well, now is the time for questions from you. If you have a question, please don't make a statement. Ask a question. And I will repeat it, and the speakers should probably all come up here so you're available to respond to questions. Questions from the audience. So the question is, what evidence is there that shows deterioration of neighborhoods from short-term rentals? Who would like to answer that question?
Okay. Well, I can give you sort of some recent complaints that have come into the Carmel Valley Association. We have an advocacy line where people call us when they have issues and ask us to look into things. And there are homes in which people have called and talked about the disturbance in the neighborhood. I can give you one right now that it's up in the hills. And it is a 6-bedroom home, and it's being run as an unlicensed B&B. People come nightly, and the neighbors that live next door have, complained because people come in the middle of the night, and because we're in the Carmel Valley where there's a lot of wine drinking going on, that also seems to be a problem that happens. We have a couple of estates that are run as both short-term rentals and event centers with wild parties that people call and complain about the noise and the fact that it's disturbing their way of life. And I would probably say in the last maybe 2-3 weeks, we've had at least 6 calls on those. And so it does disturb the neighborhoods.
In Pacific Grove, I've got 1,900 signatures from residents in PG. So there's 2 current lawsuits. STR operators are bringing 2 lawsuits against the city. One is a group Mrs. Leasure is involved with, Strong PG, and then there's another that's being funded by an outside law firm out of Arizona. The city attorney contacted me and asked me if he could use my signatures as proof of complaints and problems with short-term rentals in Pacific Grove, and I, of course, agreed. We collected twice as many signatures as necessary and only the half of the time necessary to qualify it for the ballot. And I'll leave it at that for now.
I did think of one statistic, the only one I'm aware of in Pacific Grove, is we went back to look at the number of complaints, and I believe the number was 86 complaints on all properties since the program had begun. Half of those were against 8 properties, and I believe 3 of those are no longer have their license. So in terms of a formal complaints to calling in and saying the programs are bad, it's an extremely limited number.
as a follow-up to that, we've also got members in our group who've been evicted as a result of people transforming their homes to STRs. And the thing about the hotline was out of service in Pacific Grove for a period of time. People weren't actually able to contact anybody. So, and there is no good qualifying data that can come from the city that talks about the number of complaints. So it just doesn't exist. And that's why I pointed out the petition signatures.
I just want to add to it also now, we haven't done an actual, study in the Carmel Valley, although short-term rentals were one of the primary issues that came up in an overall survey we did. One of the problems with getting an accurate count and feel for how many people are being disturbed is the way that the complaint procedure works in the county. People call in all the time, but the complaints are ranked, by degree of seriousness, and so complaints about noise or parties in the neighborhoods end up not really being paid much attention to. And so I don't think we've got a good sense of how widespread it is because there's no real actual account taken and presented as data on it by the county.
The question is, why is the coastal zone an exception to the Measure M?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the two lawsuits that I mentioned, they're being represented by the Barry Goldwater Institute. They're representing two short-term rental operators in Pacific Grove that lost their license. And they're claiming the city violated the Coastal Act by holding a lottery that they did in May that eliminated their short-term rental license, which is going to basically sunset next April, I believe. So the Coastal Act, which is administered by the Coastal Commission has policy that says they approve and they encourage short-term rentals in the coastal zone as a form of what they call low-cost, some of the highest cost STRs are in the coastal zone, low-cost visitor accommodations. In fact, there's a unit that rents for $1,400 a night down in the coastal zone in PG. So what we did, my attorney and I, when we were drafting the ballot initiative, Measure M, we looked closely at the court records and who is suing who and over what. Coastal Commission has policy that they want to encourage short-term rentals in the coastal zone. So we left it up to the city and the coastal zone and the Coastal Commission to regulate short-term rentals in the coastal zone. If we attempted to regulate in the coastal zone, we could have updated the city's local coastal program, their land use plan, which is actually a moving target right now because they haven't certified it. We could have updated that, and we would have had to still go to the Coastal Commission to have it approved. The Coastal Commission acts as a kind of a quasi-judicial body. So they would have looked at the implementation and said, no, thank you. And we would have been sued, and everyone talks about how, financing the city is so important. We didn't think bringing additional lawsuits to the city would have been responsible. So we leave it up to the city to regulate in the coastal zone, and we looked at Measure M as a referendum on short-term rentals throughout the entire city. So it's a two-step process in the coastal zone, where it's only a one-step process outside of the coastal zone.
So the question relates to impact of short-term rentals on affordable housing. Is that correct?
So yes, I could address that maybe a little bit more. First of all, just to clarify, I'm not a party to any lawsuit against the city of Pacific Grove. Affordable housing and STRs really don't go in the same sentence. They're really very unrelated to each other. We have a serious lack of housing because at the state and local levels, we have made it so arduous and expensive and created so much red tape for building and development that it has become very, very expensive to build any housing at all. We also, in this community, of course, have no water, or not water to speak of, to build housing. So, you know, all of those things contribute far more than the issue of short-term rentals. Somebody said earlier, you know, we're talking about in most communities, 3% or less of the housing being short-term rentals. If all of those housing units today were on the market and available for rent, it wouldn't make a dent in the rental market, in the long-term rental market. 95% of the business, of the rental business that I do in Monterey County is long-term. And I can just tell you that having a few more houses available for rent is not going to impact the cost of housing here. What impacts the cost of housing is the availability of housing and having lots and lots more housing available. We're not going to have that. But the thing that probably is going to impact housing more than STRs is the legislation surrounding ADUs. And when Governor Brown encouraged legislation that allowed additional ADU development, accessory dwelling unit. So in other words, if you have a single family home, you could build a guest quarters or another housing unit on that property. So the idea of that is something that could really contribute to affordable housing. But again, we have to have the water. I don't want to change the subject here, but I think that affordable housing and short-term rentals don't go in the same sentence.
I'm going to take the prerogative as chair because I've done a little research on, I've done a bit of research on this issue because the League is very concerned about affordable housing. And there are a number of studies which have been done by very legitimate organizations like UCLA and Harvard that show that short-term rentals have an result in an increase in rents. And I think this is one of the issues that has not been fully addressed. Increase in rents affect the availability of affordable housing. One study done by UCLA and USC shows that we find a 1% increase in Airbnb listings leads to a 0.018% increase in rents and a 0.026 increase in house prices at the minimum owner occupancy rate zip code. Another study shows that a 1 standard deviation increase in Airbnb listings is associated with an increase in asking rents of 0.4%. So the issue of Airbnbs having an impact on affordable housing relates directly to rental costs and an increase in rental costs.
Just a quick add to that. I didn't look at those particular studies, but the studies that I did, the overwhelming theme that came out is that, yes, short-term rentals impact and is one of the factors in a lack of affordable housing, but certainly not the only one. So, you know, we're aware that other factors are also at work here, but it does have an impact, and the degree varies by the place in which you know, you're looking at the rentals.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with the last two speakers. STRs definitely play a role, and there's more and more studies coming out that show how they affect affordable housing. One was done by the New York comptroller. Just Google. Is that one you said? Okay. Sorry. And then there's another one, Lisa Ward in the Wall Street Journal did one recently as well. But both of them show a correlation between STR usage and the cost of rental as well as housing costs. Now, it's been mentioned twice, so I'm going to have to address it. This is regarding Pacific Grove and the claim that STRs only represent 3% of the number of dwelling units. It's a very misleading figure. And the reason why is because they're treating the total pool of dwelling units, which is roughly 8,000 dwelling units, and that includes apartments, condos, single-family homes. They're treating that pool as homes that are, or residences that are actually available for an STR, and that's simply not true. And the reason why is because most apartments don't allow allow STRs, and our 4 largest homeowners associations, there's the Glen, there's Forest Grove, there's Monarch Pines, and Country Club Gate. All of those actually prohibit STRs. So they include within that figure residences that don't even allow them. So it's kind of a misleading figure. A better figure, there's about 5,000 single-family homes in Pacific Grove, and about 2,500 of those are available for renters. And 250 STRs represents about 10% of the 2,500. So you've got to be careful. You've got to dig a little deeper when you hear these numbers. Thank you.
I'd just like to respond to Luke's point there, which is he's pointing out that much of Pacific Grove is already banned from having an STR in it. So those are properties that are available to people that aren't short-term rentals. So I'm not clear on why that number is questioned.
So we have exceeded our usual time by 15 minutes, so I think I'm going to close the meeting, and speakers are available here to respond to your specific questions. So next month, don't forget pros and cons on 11 or 12 ballot measures. Thank you very much for coming. And I have to thank the panel for a non-emotional, objective discussion of this issue.
Thank you for having us, Jen.
Thanks, Jim.